Have you ever heard a story so strange, so unbelievable, that it feels like it could only be a legend? A story about two nuns, three male slaves, and a bishop, living under the shadow of 1843. At first glance, it sounds impossible. It sounds like something pulled out of a mystery novel, rather than a piece of real history. But what if I told you this story is rooted in a truth far more complex, shocking, and profound than you ever imagined? Today we will take you on a journey into a chapter of history that most people never learned in school. It's a chapter that challenges everything you think you know about religion, morality, and the dark realities of human society. By the end of this video, you will understand why respected religious figures of the 1800s were involved in systems of slavery, why this matters today, and what it really reveals about human nature and power. This isn't just a tale of scandal. It's a story about contradictions. It's about how institutions that preach compassion and love could also profit from oppression. It's a story about how people convinced themselves that what they were doing was right, even when it hurt others. And it's a story that forces us to ask a painful question: what are we overlooking in our own time, that future generations will judge us for? In the 1800s, slavery was widespread in many parts of the world. People of all walks of life participated in it, even people who wore religious habits. The idea of nuns owning enslaved people may sound shocking, but historical research shows that orders of Catholic sisters in America did own enslaved individuals, and they traded them, sold them, and used their labor to build institutions that still stand today. Imagine a convent, a place where women devoted their lives to God, yet also held captives as property. Imagine religious leaders who believed deeply in faith, yet made decisions that caused real suffering. And imagine the bishop, not as a distant figure, but someone fully aware of what was happening beneath his roof. In this era, leaders in the church not only allowed these practices to continue, in many cases they encouraged them. But here's where the story gets even more complicated. Some of these orders later faced their past. Some acknowledged the cruel systems they were part of. Some sought out descendants of the enslaved and asked for forgiveness. They unveiled monuments. They created scholarships. They confronted the ghosts of their own history with courage and honesty. That means this story isn't a simple horror tale. It's a mirror that shows us how even the most respected institutions can be blind to injustice when it's wrapped in the comforts of tradition, power, or money. It shows us how people can believe they are doing good while hurting others in the process. So stick with me, because what you're about to learn isn't just about the past. It's about the hidden truths that shape our world today. It's about understanding the human heart, its capacity for compassion, its capacity for contradiction, and its capacity to change. And most importantly, it's about seeing the world with new eyes, eyes that don't look away from the uncomfortable, the complicated, or the untold stories that shape all of us. This is Title Placeholder, a journey into a secret history that will challenge what you think you know. And by the end of this video, you'll see that the truth is far stranger and far more important than fiction. Before we talk about the world in which this strange story unfolded, we need to understand the wider reality of the mid and 1800s. In 1843, slavery was still legal in many parts of the world. In some countries, it had already been outlawed, but in others it was deeply rooted in society, law, and the economy. Slavery was an accepted institution, backed by laws and social structures that treated people as property, bought, sold, inherited, and traded like livestock in a marketplace. This was not a fringe practice. It was woven into the daily life of entire continents, economies, and empires. In the Americas and parts of the Caribbean, millions of people lived in bondage, forced to work without freedom or rights under systems that treated them as less than human. The idea of owning fellow human beings was deeply embedded in the laws and attitudes of the time, even as opposition to it was beginning to grow. At the same time, religious institutions, including the Catholic Church, were central pillars of society. Churches and religious orders were powerful in politics, education, culture, and daily life. They were among the most influential institutions in Europe and the Americas. People looked to them for moral guidance, spiritual leadership, and social structure. Priests, nuns, bishops, and other religious figures held authority that touched every level of community life. Inside those walls of supposed holiness, however, the broader moral framework of society often mirrored the norms of the world outside, including attitudes toward slavery. In many parts of the Western world, religious institutions lived in societies where enslaved people were legally recognized as property. This meant that even groups dedicated to spiritual service could be entangled with the institution of slavery through financial interests, labor, and land ownership. In some cases, religious orders, just like plantation owners or wealthy landholders, acquired enslaved workers to perform labor within their communities. These people were forced to toil in fields, schools, and homes under a legal system that gave them no voice or rights of their own, simply because the law allowed their ownership. The Church's official stance on slavery during this period was complicated. Popes and theologians condemned certain aspects of the slave trade, especially the brutal capture and transport of enslaved people, but they did not definitively condemn the institution of slavery as inherently evil until much later. Even within the Church, there were debates and disagreements about whether owning enslaved people was morally wrong or justified under certain conditions. Some leaders spoke out against enslavement, calling for humane treatment and eventual freedom. Others took a more permissive view, influenced by social norms and economic interests. Because of this ambiguity, some religious communities continued to hold enslaved workers, even while honoring their spiritual mission. This dual reality, of spiritual authority and social complicity, was not unique to the Catholic Church. In the wider world, lawmakers, religious thinkers, and ordinary citizens wrestled with the contradictions of a system that claimed freedom and salvation for all souls, while denying freedom to millions of bodies. Some nations were moving toward abolition, legal reform, and human rights, but others remained deeply committed to the economic benefits of slavery. The moral tension of the age was immense, and people in every walk of life were forced to confront the clash between evolving ideals and entrenched practices. In this setting, religious orders did not exist apart from society. They were part of the very fabric of it, influenced by its values, shaped by its laws, and sometimes blind to its injustices. That backdrop helps us understand how a story involving nuns, enslaved men, and episcopal oversight could emerge in 1843. It was a world where the sacred and the profane were tangled in ways that today can seem shocking, but at the time were part of everyday reality. In the 1800s, historians investigating the records of religious communities have uncovered a side of history that many people never learned in school. Catholic nuns in the United States and other parts of the Americas actually owned enslaved people as part of their convent operations. As scholars have examined archival documents, wills, property records, and church journals, a pattern emerges showing that orders of Catholic sisters were deeply entangled with the institution of slavery, sometimes in ways that are both surprising and uncomfortable to confront. Some of the earliest Catholic convents that took root in the United States did not emerge in isolation from the social norms of the time. When religious women joined the convents, they sometimes brought enslaved individuals with them as part of their dowries or property contributions, because this was a common social practice in societies built on slavery. Wealthy families and supporters also donated enslaved people to convents, increasing the number of individuals held in bondage under the authority of the sisters. Once part of convent life, enslaved men, women, and children were used in labor that supported the everyday functions of the religious communities. They worked in gardens, kitchens, laundries, schools, and on land owned by the convent, people whose physical toil helped sustain the institutions that the sisters ran. Records from several orders show that nearly all of the Catholic sisterhoods established in the early 1800s owned enslaved people by the 1820s, with some holding significant numbers. In some cases, convent leaders made decisions to buy and sell enslaved people for financial reasons. When churches and schools faced mounting debt or needed funds for expansion, the sale of enslaved workers was sometimes viewed as a means to raise money. One historic report found that a single convent had owned more than 100 enslaved individuals, and sold many of them over the decades to fund building projects and pay off debts, transactions carried out with formal records and court filings. Researchers studying archives from orders like the Sisters of Charity have discovered that multiple congregations benefited directly from enslaved labor and engaged in buying and selling practices before slavery was outlawed in 1865. These findings were so significant that the religious communities publicly acknowledged their involvement and invited discussion about how to address this history with honesty and spiritual reflection. The reality that nuns, women devoted to spiritual service, also participated in slavery may feel jarring today, but it reflects the broader societal norms of the time. In an era when slavery was legally sanctioned and deeply embedded in economic and cultural life, even respected religious institutions were not immune to its influence. These historical revelations remind us that no part of society was untouched by the moral and human costs of slavery, and that confronting these truths is necessary for understanding both the past and its long-lasting impact on the present. Before we talk about the daily life of enslaved people within convents, it's important to understand how they were perceived in society at large. In the 1800s, enslaved individuals were often seen primarily as a source of labor, their value measured by their ability to work in farming, construction, or domestic tasks. Fields, kitchens, gardens and workshops relied on their strength and skill. Enslaved people were not considered citizens, nor were they treated as full human beings. Their lives were bound by the demands of those who owned them. From sunrise to sunset, their labor was expected and exploited, forming the backbone of economic and social systems in many parts of the world. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to seeing the historical reality. Nuns, like other members of society, were products of their time. Their adoption of social norms surrounding slavery shows how deeply entrenched these practices were and how difficult it was to question or oppose them, even within institutions devoted to moral and spiritual ideals. Slavery shaped daily life, work and relationships, leaving a legacy that continues to challenge how we interpret the past. In the archives of church history, researchers have unearthed startling evidence that challenges the way many people think about religious life in the 1800s. Archival research conducted by historians and archivists shows that some Catholic religious orders, including branches of the Sisters of Charity, did in fact own enslaved individuals during the 19th century. The Sisters of Charity Federation, which brings together several congregations in the United States, acknowledged in a letter that their predecessors owned at least 3 enslaved people before slavery was outlawed in 1865. These findings were based on careful review of public records and congregational archives that had long been overlooked or forgotten. The records show that these orders did more than simply live alongside slavery in a general sense. They directly benefited from enslaved labor in multiple locations, including Maryland, Louisiana, and Missouri. In Maryland, documentation confirms that enslaved people were owned by the Sisters and Daughters of Charity in the early and mid-19th century. In New Orleans, the sisters benefited from the labor of enslaved individuals while working at Charity Hospital, and in St. Louis there is evidence of enslaved labor being used in hospital work. This was not merely incidental, it was woven into the operations of these religious communities. The archival evidence shows that the sisters received proceeds from the sale of enslaved people on more than one occasion, indicating that enslaved individuals were treated as assets that could be sold to raise funds. Financial records from schools and convents of the time reveal that money from the sale of enslaved people was sometimes used to support institutional needs, including the everyday functioning of schools and hospitals. This involvement with slavery was not limited to one isolated group. Historians note that by the late 1820s, nearly all orders of Catholic sisters established in the United States owned enslaved people, reflecting the broader societal entanglement with the institution of slavery. While some members of these orders may have felt discomfort with the practice, the legal and economic structures of the time made it commonplace. The Sisters of Charity Federation's research also reveals that these historical realities were not previously well known within the communities themselves. Many sisters were unaware of the depth of their congregation's involvement with enslaved labor until archivists began systematic study of the archival records. This realization has prompted some orders to engage in public acknowledgement and reflection, with letters to members that express regret and call for honesty about these troubling chapters in their histories. The archival work that uncovered these facts involved careful analysis of records from a wide variety of sources, including diocesan archives, public documents, and congregation-specific collections. Through this painstaking process, historians were able to identify names, dates, and transactions that shed light on the lived experience of those enslaved by religious orders, and the ways in which the orders participated in the economic systems of their time. While the numbers found in some archives, such as the documented ownership of at least 3 enslaved individuals in certain branches, may seem small compared to the scale of slavery in general, the significance lies in the revelation that religious orders were not exempt from the institution's reach. These findings make it clear that enslaved labor was part of the operational and financial reality for some religious communities in the 19th century, and that confronting this history requires both scholarly rigor and moral courage. It is also worth noting that bishops' involvement varied widely depending on location, personal beliefs, and the culture of the diocese. Some bishops actively discouraged the use of enslaved labor or sought to limit its presence in convents, while others accepted it as a practical necessity for running institutions that required significant manpower. In areas where slavery was economically and socially entrenched, bishops often deferred to prevailing norms, interpreting canon law in ways that accommodated the ownership and management of enslaved individuals. The historical record makes it clear that bishops were neither distant observers nor powerless figures in this system. Their authority and decisions shaped the lives of both the sisters and the enslaved individuals who labored within religious institutions. Understanding their role provides insight into how religious, moral, and economic considerations intersected in the 19th century, and how institutions that preached spiritual virtue could simultaneously participate in and regulate systems of bondage. Before we talk about the people behind the word slaves, it's crucial to remember that this term does not capture the full humanity of those it describes. Each enslaved individual was a living, breathing human being with a life, a family, and intrinsic worth that no law or social custom could erase. They had hopes, fears, and dreams even in circumstances designed to deny them any agency. In convents, as in many other places during the 1800s, enslaved men, women, and children were treated as property, yet their lives were rich with resilience, struggle, and quiet acts of endurance that often went unnoticed by the wider society. Within the walls of convents, enslaved people performed a wide range of tasks essential to the daily functioning of the religious communities. They worked in kitchens, cleaned floors, tended gardens, and carried water, often laboring from dawn until dusk with little reprieve. Their contributions were vital, yet their work was unrecognized in the formal hierarchy of the institution. They had no freedom to choose how they spent their days or where they lived, and they were denied the most basic legal rights that could have protected them from exploitation or abuse. Their labor sustained the convents, schools, and hospitals, yet they themselves were excluded from the spiritual and social recognition afforded to the sisters and other free members of society. Enslaved people in convents were also cut off from autonomy over their family life. Some were separated from their children, spouses, or parents when individuals were sold, traded, or assigned to different locations. In cases where families remained together, it was often due to the rare intervention of compassionate caretakers rather than a systemic acknowledgement of human dignity. Despite these limitations, enslaved people maintained their humanity in countless ways through cultural traditions, shared meals, songs, prayers, and subtle acts of defiance or care for one another. These acts created bonds of community and survival within an environment designed to suppress individuality and freedom. Historical records indicate that the lives of enslaved individuals in convents were not always fully visible to the outside world. While archives document transactions, property inventories, and labor assignments, they rarely capture the lived experience, emotions, or personal stories of those who were enslaved. Scholars working with oral histories, letters, and fragmented records strive to reconstruct these human experiences, revealing the courage, endurance, and quiet resistance that characterize the daily lives of enslaved people. Each name discovered in the archives represents a person who endured a system of oppression yet retained a sense of self, even under impossible circumstances. It is also important to understand that the legal and social systems of the time systematically denied enslaved people their rights. They could not own property, vote, or access the protections of the law. Their movements were restricted, their labor controlled, and their voices largely silenced. In convents, this meant that while they might be closely observed, guided, or even instructed in religious practices, they did so not as participants in a spiritual community with equal standing, but as individuals whose very existence was controlled and commodified. Recognizing the full humanity of enslaved people allows us to see beyond the historical term slave and confront the real experiences of those whose labor and lives were exploited. It reminds us that every historical discussion about institutions, orders or leaders involved in slavery must include the lived realities of those who endured it. They were not abstractions, nor mere entries in ledgers. They were human beings whose courage, suffering and perseverance form an essential part of the historical record. Before we talk about the moral complexities faced by nuns in the 1800s, it's important to understand that their experiences and attitudes towards slavery were not uniform. Some nuns genuinely felt conflicted about owning enslaved individuals. They were committed to spiritual ideals of compassion, charity and human dignity, yet they lived in a world where slavery was legally and socially accepted. This conflict often weighed heavily on their consciences. Letters and journals from the period reveal moments of doubt, sorrow and prayerful reflection as some sisters questioned the morality of participating in a system that treated human beings as property. They struggled to reconcile their faith with the practices of their communities, sometimes feeling guilt for a system they did not create but nonetheless upheld. At the same time, many nuns viewed the ownership of enslaved individuals as normal, practical and even necessary. In a society where slavery was legally sanctioned, where convents depended on labor for farming, cooking, cleaning and construction, and where wealth and property were often measured in human terms, owning enslaved people was seen as a routine aspect of life. For these nuns, the practice was not viewed as inherently immoral but as a way to sustain the work of the convent and fulfill its charitable missions. Social norms, cultural pressures and the daily realities of maintaining a functioning institution made it easy for some sisters to accept slavery without questioning it. The tension between moral conscience and social norm created a complex ethical landscape. Some nuns attempted to mitigate the harshness of slavery in subtle ways. They might ensure that enslaved families were kept together, provide better living conditions, or offer education and religious instruction. These acts, while limited in scope, indicate that even within a system of oppression, individual moral concern could emerge. However, these gestures did not change the fundamental reality that the individuals were still considered property, stripped of freedom and basic rights. Over time, as societal attitudes shifted and slavery was abolished, Catholic orders began to confront this difficult history. Research and archival work revealed the extent to which convents had relied on enslaved labor, prompting reflection and acknowledgement. Some orders issued formal apologies to recognize the suffering endured by enslaved individuals, and to accept responsibility for the actions of their predecessors. Public statements, commemorations and educational initiatives became ways for modern communities to grapple with this legacy. These acts of acknowledgement represent a broader effort within the Church to confront historical wrongs and promote healing and understanding. The process of reckoning with this history has not been easy. It involves facing uncomfortable truths about revered institutions and spiritual figures, and acknowledging the human cost of decisions made in the past. Yet by confronting these truths, Catholic orders have sought to honor the lives of those who were enslaved, give voice to their experiences, and ensure that their suffering is not forgotten. Modern communities use these lessons to foster awareness, compassion, and a deeper understanding of justice, illustrating that spiritual growth often requires confronting the mistakes of the past. This evolving recognition also highlights the importance of historical accountability. Confronting uncomfortable truths does not erase the past, but it allows institutions to learn from it, to educate future generations, and to reaffirm their commitment to human dignity. By acknowledging both the complicity and the moral conflicts of nuns in the 1800s, Catholic orders demonstrate a willingness to engage honestly with history, and to use that knowledge to guide contemporary action and ethical reflection. Before we talk about the way modern Catholic communities are responding, it's important to understand the weight of the history they are confronting. For centuries, the stories of enslaved individuals who labored within convents, schools, hospitals, and other religious institutions were largely hidden or ignored. Their contributions, suffering, and humanity were absent from the public narrative, leaving a gap in how we understand both the history of the Church and the broader story of slavery. In recent decades, however, many Catholic communities have taken deliberate steps to acknowledge this painful past, recognizing that historical truth is essential for moral reflection, reconciliation, and education. Some communities have begun to open archives, research records, and publish findings that shed light on the lives of enslaved people connected to their institutions. By examining property records, personal letters, wills, and ledgers, these orders have been able to identify names, family connections, and experiences that were previously unknown or overlooked. This research has revealed not only the extent of slavery's reach into religious life, but also the everyday realities of those who lived under its constraints. It is a painstaking and often emotional process, as it forces contemporary communities to confront the complicity of their predecessors, and to reckon with the human cost of decisions made in the past. Beyond research, some Catholic communities have taken steps to commemorate enslaved people through memorials, monuments, and public spaces of recognition. These physical tributes are intended to honor the lives and legacies of those whose labor and suffering helped sustain religious institutions. In certain cases, statues or plaques have been installed on the grounds of convents, schools, and hospitals, ensuring that visitors and members of the community are reminded of this hidden history. These memorials are not only acts of acknowledgement but also serve as spaces for reflection, empathy, and education. They transform historical recognition into a tangible, visible, and ongoing commitment to truth. Education has also become a central component of this effort. Many religious orders have developed programs, lectures, workshops, and curricula that teach the history of enslaved individuals connected to their institutions. These programs aim to ensure that the next generation of sisters, students, and community members understand the realities of the past and the moral lessons it holds. By integrating these stories into educational frameworks, Catholic communities are fostering awareness, dialogue, and a sense of responsibility to remember and honor those who suffered. Some programs also involve community engagement, inviting descendants and local residents to participate in storytelling, historical reconstruction, and discussions about reparative actions. Acknowledging this history is not just about looking backward, it is also about shaping the moral and ethical approach of the Church in the present. Creating memorials and educational programs, modern Catholic communities demonstrate that they value justice, human dignity, and the importance of facing uncomfortable truths. These efforts reflect a commitment to transparency, healing, and moral accountability. They remind us that confronting past wrongs, however painful, is necessary for spiritual growth and societal progress. Through these initiatives, the lives of enslaved individuals are no longer invisible. Their stories are reclaimed, remembered, and honored. Modern Catholic communities are showing that acknowledging historical pain can transform institutions, inspire empathy, and educate the broader public about the complex, often hidden intersections of faith, labor, and morality in history. As we reflect on this story, it becomes clear that even the most respected institutions and individuals can be blind to moral wrongs in their own time. What seems shocking to us today was, for many people in the 1800s, considered normal or necessary. This history reminds us of the importance of questioning accepted norms, listening to voices that are often silenced, and recognizing the humanity in everyone, regardless of the systems that try to diminish it. Looking closely at the past, we not only honor those who suffered, but also gain insight into how we can act with greater empathy, justice, and awareness in our own lives. Take a moment to think about the lessons hidden in these stories. Reflect on how history can guide us to make more conscious choices today, to see beyond appearances, and to acknowledge the pain that others endure. Understanding these truths is not easy, but it is essential if we hope to build a more compassionate world. If you found this video eye-opening and meaningful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover hidden histories and offer powerful lessons for life.